The feet do so much for us. I think I read one time that the feet absorb about 3 million pounds of pressure every day. So we got to take care of our feet. And part of taking care of them is about keeping them flexible, keeping them mobile. And another part of taking care of them is keeping them strong. I think sometimes when we wear shoes all the time and we kind of shove our feet in that like contained apparatus, we don't get as much mobility through the feet, which then limits how different muscles and joints work. So these exercises are meant to help stimulate the proprioceptive feedback in the feet, to awaken the feet, and then also really work to strengthen the muscles in the toes specifically, so that as we walk and we push off, we're using the feet instead of shuffling or sort of lifting from our thighs and our back to bring our legs into a walking gait movement. So today I'd like to share with you just an initial start is to work the feet and say hello to the feet, be kind to them, and get a little bit of what do you notice about your feet, and can you do some feel good, just rubbing or stretching, opening that space between the toes a little bit. So I'm really concentrating a bit more today on the toes and the strength of the toes, which of course will be using different muscles in the feet as well. So once we've done that, you might just wiggle those toes around a bit. Notice how they move. And if one toe kind of is stuck to the other, maybe you help it out along a little bit by moving it manually yourself. And hopefully it begins to like learn a bit of a new pattern there. And so really opening up, getting that stretch through the underneath side of the toes, little scrunching and fanning out kind of the toes is really helpful. And then the next thing we're going to do is lengthen the toes and see if we can lengthen as much of the underneath part of the toe as possible to bring it into contact with the surface under you, the floor under you. So we're going to bring that big toe up and gently place it down. And then the second toe, lifting it up, the fingers going underneath it and lengthening it out and placing it down on the floor. The same with the third toe, fourth, and fifth. So we want to have as much of the contact of the bottom part of the toe connected to the floor as possible. And already, notice if you can feel that little bit of pressure being pushed down into the floor. Now, sometimes what happens is that we scrunch our toes. I'm kind of showing you with my fingers here what the toes do. And the toes like to curl up. And that creates a lot of space between the bottom part of our toes and the floor, the surface. So part of this practice is learning how to lengthen out those toes and really feel the underneath side of the toe making contact with the floor. So that's the first step, is just notice as you could do this sitting in a chair and just sort of place a little bit of weight or pressure down. And maybe you visually look at those toes and see if they are flattening out into the earth as opposed to gripping, bracing, kind of curling up. We want that flat, lengthened position. So that's a start. Then the next part is we're going to add a little bit more challenge as we come to standing. So now that we're standing, you may notice a little bit different relationship as you add your body weight to the relationship of your foot on the floor. And sometimes it may be that like, oh, I do notice that my toes are starting to curl up again. In which case, you might use something like a little tissue to be your bolster to raise the floor up to meet the bottom level of your toes. So you could kind of scrunch it up in whatever way works for your toes and slide it under your toes in whichever toes feel like they need a little bit more lift or a little bit more contact with something. So that's giving your body the sensory feedback to be able to push against something. So now that we're standing, we're going to gently flatten out those toes. Again, if you need a visual, check out your toes to make sure they're not gripping. shift your weight forward slightly into the feet, and then either think about or actually lift your heels just a little bit, but try not to lift from the calves, from the back of the legs. See if you can lift because you're pushing so far down into the floor with the underneath side of your toes that your heels float off the floor. Notice that action. So it's different than kind of doing this, right? So that's kind of a calf raise. You're really working the bottoms of the muscles on the bottoms of those toes. So I do a little shift forward. I lengthen my toes and press into the floor a little bit more. And then notice if I can keep pressing almost through the floor, and that allows my heels to lift up and out. Now, generally only a couple of these will fatigue the feet pretty quickly. So notice how you feel, and then you can let that tissue or your little toe bolster go. Sometimes I like to do one side and then the other because it helps me assess what the differences is, or what the difference between my 2 feet are, my toes. And then you can also maybe take a little walk around your space and notice specifically that part where your toes are pushing off of the floor, and noticing if the bottoms of the toes can really feel that same engagement, that same strengthening. And that will help work this whole back side of the leg. You'll have stronger glutes and a lot more stability in your feet as well. I can really notice the difference between my 2 feet. So I hope that helps, should help with your balance, should help with feeling very strong and stable in your feet. Thanks for joining me today.